The big house did prove a palace beautiful, though it took some time for all of them to get in, and Beth found it very hard to pass the lions. Where are the lions located? Connor? Good. You have to get past the lions before you can get into the palace. So for Beth, what are her lions that she has to conquer? Layla? Her fear. Good. Old Mr. Lawrence was the biggest one, the biggest fear. But after he had called several times and said something funny or kind to each one of the girls, nobody felt much afraid of him, except for timid Beth. The other lion was the fact that they were poor and Laurie rich. This made them shy of accepting his favors, which they could not return. But after a while, they found that he considered them the benefactors. Okay, pause. Why would it be hard to accept things from someone who's much more rich than you are? Micah? Very good. You feel kind of guilty, like, man, he gave me a really awesome this, but I only have this to give to him. Okay? At first, it's not a big deal, but after a while, the girls were starting to feel bad. But after a while, they found that he considered them the benefactors. What's a benefactor? Diksha? So in Laurie's mind, they were the ones helping him. Why? How are they helping Laurie? Jacob?
They're helping him by visiting him.
Visiting him and just being his friend.
Also, guilt does things.
He could not do enough to show how grateful he was for the comfort he took in that humble home of theirs. So they soon forgot their pride and interchanged kindnesses without stopping to think which was the greater. That's a good friendship right there, right?
No.
They're exchanging what? Yes, it is. They're exchanging. No, they're exchanging gifts without caring whose was better. Because to Laurie, it didn't matter that he had given them an expensive gift; they gave him a small, inexpensive gift. He was more thankful for their friendship than anything. So eventually, they kind of put aside the fact that they both came from very different worlds and were able to be friends. Everyone liked Laurie, and he privately informed his tutor, Mr. Brooke, that the Marches were regularly splendid girls. With delightful enthusiasm, they took the solitary boy into their midst and made much of him. And what good times they had, to be sure. Such plays and sleigh rides and skating frolics, such pleasant evenings in the old parlor, and now and then such gay little parties in the great house. Meg walked in the conservatory whenever she liked to delight in the bouquets. Jo read voraciously. What does voraciously mean? Connor? And amused the old gentleman with her criticisms. Amy copied beautiful pictures to her heart's content, and Laurie played Lord of the Manor in the most delightful style. But Beth, though yearning for the grand piano, could not pluck up the courage to go to the mansion of bliss, as Meg called it. She went once with Jo, but the old gentleman, not being aware of her shyness, said, "Hey!" so loud that she ran away, declaring she would never go there any more, not even for the dear piano. What scared her away the first time? Chloe?
Like before we got sick?
No.
No.
He was trying to be nice, and it scared Beth, and she ran away. No persuasions or enticements could overcome her fear until Mr. Lawrence, hearing of the situation from Laurie, set about mending the matters. So eventually it got back to Mr. Lawrence that he had scared Beth away, and she was scared to death to come over to his house. And so that made him feel terrible. He didn't want to make her feel scared of him. So he set about to fix things. He's like, I'm going to make sure she's able to come over and isn't afraid of me anymore. One day while he was visiting, he artfully led the conversation to music and talked away about great singers and musicians whom he had seen until Beth found it impossible to stay in her distant corner. She crept nearer and nearer until she stopped at the back of his chair where she stood listening. her great eyes wide open and her cheeks red with excitement. Mr. Lawrence talked on, and presently, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to Mrs. March, "The boy neglects his music now, and I'm glad of it, for he was getting too fond of it. Wouldn't some of your girls like to run over and practice on our piano now and then? Just to, keep it in tune, ma'am?" Okay, so here's the thing. Mr. Lawrence is visiting at the March's house. Okay? So Beth is not in the room. Mr. Lawrence is just chatting with Marmee. Okay? Two adults chatting in that dining table or whatever. He starts talking about music. Does he do that on accident? No. He is purposefully talking about all these things he knows that Beth will love because he knows she's going to be creeping towards him to listen to what she's saying. But she's hiding. Okay? She's not going to make herself known. Okay? But she could not stand it any longer till she crept up behind the man's chair just to listen to what he was saying. Do you think he knew she was there?
Yes.
Yes. Which is why he says, Mrs. March, don't you think some of your girls would want to come and play on our piano? Saying it loud enough for Beth to hear. He's trying to get her to come over. You see? Beth took a step forward, her hands pressed tightly together to keep from clapping them. The thought of practicing on that splendid instrument quite took her breath away. Mr. Lawrence went on with an odd little nod and smile. They needn't see or speak to anyone, for I'm always shut up in my study at the other end of the house. Laurie is out a great deal, and the servants are never near the drawing room after 9 o'clock. Why does he say all those things? Wyatt? He's setting up the perfect way for her to come over. What time is she going to come over? After 9 o'clock, when all the servants are gone. He rose as if going to leave. Please, tell the young ladies, and if they don't care to come, why, never mind. Here, a little hand slipped into his as Beth looked up at him and said in her earnest yet timid way, "Oh, sir, they do care. Very, very much." "Are you the musical girl?" he asked very kindly. "I'm Beth. I love it dearly, and I'll come, but only if you're quite sure nobody will hear me and be disturbed," she added, trembling at her own boldness as she spoke. "Not a soul, my dear. The house is empty half the day, so come and drum away as much as you like." Beth blushed like a rose and gave the hand a grateful squeeze, because she had no other words to thank him. The old gentleman softly stroked the hair off her forehead, and stooping down, he kissed her, saying, in a tone few people ever heard, okay, kissed her on the head like an old grandpa, okay? Don't be weird. He kissed her, saying in a tone that few people ever heard from Mr. Lawrence, "I had a little girl once, with eyes like these. God bless you, my dear. Good day, madam." And away he went in a great hurry. Next day, having seen both the old and young gentlemen out of the house, Beth crept in at the side door and made... Oh, it might be now. Okay. In a general state of beatitude. What's beatitude? Manny? Huh? Bliss. Very good. Where was I? Oh, good. Okay, perfect. After that, the little brown hood slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing room was haunted by a tuneful spirit that came and went unseen. She never knew that Mr. Lawrence would open his study door just to hear her play. She never saw Laurie stand guard in the hall to warn the servants away. This is so cute. He would stand in the hallway outside the door, okay? And anytime a servant would come by, he would shh. Because if Beth saw that there were servants coming by, she would get scared and run away. So Laurie would stand guard and shoo away all the servants so that Beth would be able to play. So nice. No. Hey, Brooklyn? Oh, I'm over here. Let's see. Oh, she never saw Lori stand guard in the hall to warn the servants away. She never suspected that the songbooks which she found in the rack were put there especially for her. She enjoyed herself heartily and found, what isn't always the case, that her granted wish was all she had hoped for. Perhaps it was because she was so grateful for this blessing that a greater was given to her. At any rate, she deserved both. Beth decided to make a pair of slippers for Mr. Lawrence in order to express her thanks for his great generosity. After many serious discussions with Meg and Joe, the pattern was chosen, the materials bought, and the slippers begun. Beth worked away early and late. She was a nimble little needlewoman, and they were finished before anyone got tired of them. Then she wrote a short, simple note, and with Laurie's help, got them smuggled onto the study table one morning before the old gentleman was up. So she sewed herself a pair of slippers for Mr. Lawrence to thank him. When this excitement was over, Beth waited to see what would happen. All day passed, and a part of the next, and she was beginning to fear she had offended her crotchety friend. What's a crotchety friend? Layla? Mm-hmm. On the afternoon of the second day, she went out to do an errand. As she came upon the street, on her return, she saw four heads popping in and out of the parlor windows. The moment they saw her, several hands were waved and several joyful voices screamed, "Here's a letter from the old gentleman! Come quick and read it!" Okay, you have to understand, Mr. Lawrence is a very kind man, but you have to get past some of his kind of outer exterior. You ever met someone like that? I have an uncle like this. Extremely, extremely soft-hearted. But you have to get past his kind of rough outer exterior before you see what he's really. He's almost like he's so sweet that he has to be really mean to kind of cover it up. Does that make sense? He's not mean, but that's kind of how Mr. Lawrence is. A lot of people are afraid of him because he's kind of a grouchy, crotchety old man. But sweet little Beth has kind of won his heart. Yes. "Oh, Beth, he sent you," began Amy, but she got no further, for Joe quenched her by slamming down the window. Beth hurried on in a flutter of suspense. At the door her sisters seized her and led her to the parlor, all pointing and saying at once, "Look! Look there! Look there!" Beth did look, and turned pale with delight and surprise, for there stood a little cabinet piano, with a letter lying on the glossy lid addressed to Miss Elizabeth March. For me?" gasped Beth, holding on to Joe and feeling as if she should tumble down. "Yes, all for you, my precious. Isn't it splendid of him? Don't you just think he's the dearest old man in the world? Here's the key in the letter. We didn't open it, but we are dying to know what he says," cried Joe, hugging her sister and offering the note. "You read it. I can't. I feel so queer. Oh, it's too lovely," said Beth, and hid her face in Joe's apron, quite upset by her presence. Is she upset in a good way?
Yes.
No. Yeah, she's upset in a good way. She's not upset in a bad way. Like she's so happy she's in tears. Joe opened the paper and began to read. I love this part. Don't run this. "Miss March. Dear Madam, I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I have never had any that suited me so well as yours. They will always remind me of the gentle giver. I like to pay my debts, So I know you will allow this old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes, I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. Where did the piano come from? Who gave it to her? Let's start there. Micah? Mr. Lawrence. Where did the piano come from? Aiden? Very good. Remember back a few pages before, he was talking to Beth, and he said, you remind me of a daughter that I once had, that I lost a long time ago. A long time ago, Mr. Lawrence had a little granddaughter that reminded him a lot, that Beth reminds him a lot of. The book doesn't tell us how, but somehow she died or was taken away or something like that. But the piano belonged to her, and he is now giving that piano to Beth. Very sweet. There, Beth, that is an honor. Lori told me how fond Mr. Lawrence used to be of the child who died, and how he kept all her little things carefully. Just think, he's giving you her piano. That comes of having big blue eyes and loving music, said Joe, trying to soothe Beth, who trembled and looked more excited than she had ever been before. Meg opened the instrument to admire and display its beauties. Amy was much impressed by the elegance of the note and couldn't wait to tell all the girls at school. Beth gave the little instrument a try, and everyone pronounced it the most remarkable piano ever heard. But, perfect as it was, I think the real charm lay in the happiest of all happy faces which leaned over it, as Beth lovingly touched the beautiful black and white keys and pressed the bright pedals. You'll have to go and thank him, said Joe, by way of a joke, for the idea of the child really going over there never even entered her mind. Why would it never even enter her head? Micah? Yeah. She's like, you're going to have to go thank him. Never thinking she would actually do that because Beth is way too scared. And Beth says, yes, I guess I'll go right now, before I get frightened thinking about it. And to the utter amazement of the assembled family, Beth walked deliberately down the garden, through the hedge, and in at the Lawrences' door. They all stared after her, probably like this, rendered quite speechless by the miracle. They would have been still more amazed if they had seen what Beth did afterward. If you will believe me, she went and knocked at the study door before she gave herself time to think. When a gruff voice called out, come in, she did go in, right up to Mr. Lawrence. He looked quite taken aback as she held out her hand, saying with only a small quaver in her voice, I came to thank you, sir, for... But she didn't finish, for he looked so friendly that she put both arms around his neck and kissed him. If the roof of the house had suddenly flown off, the old gentleman wouldn't have been more astonished. But he liked it. Oh dear, yes, he liked it amazingly. He set her on his knee and laid his wrinkled cheek against her rosy one, feeling as if he had got his own little granddaughter back again. Beth lost all fear of him at that moment and sat there talking to him as cozily as if she had known him all her life. When she went home, he walked with her to her own gate, shook hands cordially, and touched his hat in a gentlemanly manner. Can you imagine all the girls' response as he, like a gentleman, bids her good night? They're like, when the girls saw that performance, Joe began to dance a jig. Amy nearly fell out of the window in surprise, and Meg exclaimed with uplifted hands, well, I do believe the world is coming to an end. The day that Beth has the bravery to go over and kiss Mr. Lawrence He walks her back home and greets her like a gentleman. I mean, pigs are gonna fly. Who would have thought?
The
No.
face just started to
Crazy, crazy, crazy.
The world coming to an
I
end.
will say that